Good afternoon, folks. Thanks for joining us today. Welcome to the third installment of the Lone Visionaries Industry Insights webinar series. My name is Jordan Pavelka. I'm the Marketing and Communications Manager at Lone Vision, and today I am joined by Tyler Doerner, who will be leading the discussion on today's topic, how mortgage lenders can use technology to thrive in the COVID world. Tyler is the Vice President of Sales over at WatServ, and he is incredibly experienced with Microsoft Dynamics partners in AX, GP, NAV, and SL, having entered the space in 2002. He's my personal go-to when looking for more information on maximizing cloud-based strategies and how to prepare for the future of technology. So anytime you see any writing come out of us on that, Tyler's probably helped me write it. Tyler, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thanks.
Good, that's great to hear. Before we jump in, I just have a couple of quick housekeeping items. We are recording today's call and we'll be sharing it to all registered attendees. All attendees are muted, but we do want this to be interactive. So if you have any questions, you can send them to us at any time via the chat box, the Q&A box, or if you'd prefer, you can hit the raise hand button and we will unmute you to ask your questions. I'm going to now pass the time over to the expert, Tyler, so he can get started.
Awesome, thanks, Jordan. I'd like to start out by thanking the Best Born Group, Jordan, Carl, Martin, and the rest of the team. Unfortunately, we were supposed to do this presentation in Colorado right around now in person, but instead you get me live from my basement office, as you can see. So I look forward to meeting everybody at the next Best Born and Lone Vision user conference, and hopefully you'll see my friendly face again doing something similar. So you'll pardon me if I'm kind of wandering around at my desk a little bit. I'm used to doing this at the front of the room with everybody in person, so this is kind of new to me as well. You know, I'm normally used to, like I said, doing it with a big group of people, not just with my dog laying on the floor in the basement here. So, all right, so let's jump into it. I know that from working with the Lone Vision group for probably the last 4 to 5 years now, from a hosted dynamics perspective, I mean, the world got turned upside down in March. And now that kind of things seem to be somewhat quasi starting to maybe eventually get back to normal. You know, how can technology help customers, help people, help everybody kind of live in this new normal that doesn't look like it's ever going to completely go back to the way that it was? So some of the things that I want to spend some time talking about today that hopefully will resonate with the group online is, you know, the concept of remote work, kind of what happened. You know, is it time to kind of go back and look at what you had to do in March because frankly, you had to figure out how to keep the world moving, but was it necessarily done the right way? And when I was kind of preparing for this conversation, I was doing some Googling online, and I found an interesting article from Forbes that I'll share with everybody on kind of a Doomsday versus Boomsday scenario, specifically for mortgage lenders in the mortgage industry. You know, what does the new normal look like for everybody now? How can you use technology to scale? What are some of the industry trends out there from, you know, again, with the impact of COVID and cybersecurity and attacks and that sort of thing? And then I'll try to make some just very generic, practical things that, you know, you should be thinking about going forward if you haven't started thinking about these things already, not specifically from a hosting perspective, but more just broader risk mitigation, risk management, things that you should be planning for. So I'm hopefully not going to spend a whole hour talking at you guys on the phone, but please feel free to interrupt with any questions. Jordan's going to moderate the chat for me, and if there's any questions, feel free to interrupt. So again, I touched on some of this at the beginning, but you know, COVID-19 forced the whole world to get turned upside down very, very quickly. You know, I saw an article probably 4 or 5 months ago, and it was just my local police department. And that, you know, the police force was used to, you know, you go into work, you sign into your workstation, you put in your time on your shift, and you go home. But so everybody at the police station all had desktops, and now all of a sudden everybody was forced to go out, and they had to go out and spend something like $300,000 or $400,000 on laptops for the whole police force because nobody could go into work. So kind of an example of where you would think somebody wouldn't have to really adapt, but they weren't set up to do remote work. But was it done correctly? Did they get the right stuff? Is it time to go back and understand what was done and should it be improved upon? I think technology allowed a lot of people to survive through this last 6 months with COVID, but it really can't help you thrive. Our office culture was one that everybody kind of went to the office, and now that everybody was kind of forced to work from home, it's kind of like, hey, this works, right? You are more productive. You work a different type of day, but the need to spend 2-3 hours in the car going to and from an office has been removed really, really quickly. And so it helped a lot of organizations survive, or not only survive, but thrive. And I don't see many companies going back to that environment where you have to show up and you work from 8:30 till 5, right? So how do you enable your people to have that flexibility that they've had for the last 6 months? Excuse me. So I mentioned in the beginning this article that I found that I thought was very, very good. So it was Doomsday versus Boomsday. So in the Doomsday scenario, it's kind of COVID coming fall here. I think everybody's seen the articles where everybody's worried about a second wave and things being locked down. With my kids anyway going back to school this week, and what's that going to look like? So, this is kind of going to head in either two directions. One, it's kind of going to go back to where we were, maybe not fully back to where we were in March, April timeframe when things were getting locked down, but could it head into a way that is more restrictive and kind of closer to where we were back then? But so in that scenario, you're going to need the digital processes, you probably cobbled together, back in March, April timeframe. But to be able to do your business, continue to make loans, this is the only real way to kind of keep the business running, is having this technology footprint in place in a doomsday scenario. In the Boomsday scenario, the exact opposite, right? Interest rates are at the lowest point in history, and I'm not going to read everything on these slides. I will distribute them through Jordan and the Loan Vision team, that you can have them, or you can come back and watch the webinar again and kind of read the slides word for word. But basically, kind of the worst case scenario in Doomsday is everything goes back to where we were, and we're kind of going back to the April, May, June timeframe. Or we kind of come out of this thing, we get a vaccine, lowest interest rates in history. How are you going to scale? How are you going to put up with this unprecedented volumes, right? If you try to slide back into the old ways of handling your business and doing your transactions and processing mortgages, you're probably going to get left behind by the organizations that have adapted some of these new technologies and who are setting themselves up to scale in the event of a boom. So as we kind of come back to the working remote, everybody did what they needed to do back in March, April timeframe. Was it done correctly? Are your employees working securely while they're at home, right? Most people, if you're like me, who have kids in school, kids were also starting to work remotely and take their online classes. But if your employees have their kids using their work computer to watch the YouTube videos for their class in the evenings while you're not necessarily using it for work, is that the best use of your company's assets, right? So these are some stats on here as well. 22% of the endpoints being the end users who are accessing your data and your business systems, are vulnerable, right? So how do you lock that down? How do you make sure that when your employees are working remotely, that they're working securely? 43% of organizations have overlapping or redundant productivity solutions. So case in point, I had to sign up for a Zoom account for this presentation today, because our organization is Microsoft based and we primarily use Microsoft Teams. There's GoToMeeting, there's Google Meets, there's any number of different collaboration platforms out there, but that exposes risk to your organization if your corporate information is being shared over multiple productivity solutions, right? Do you really know where your data is? Do you really know what communication methods your employees are using to communicate your sometimes proprietary information? And again, here's another one where endpoints are at the end of life cycle. So unsupported version of Windows or older hardware or older antivirus. So these are some of the things that as people have been forced to work remote that are now kind of a new risk or a new security component that organizations need to consider is how to work securely while working remotely. And again, I don't think anybody's naive enough to think that we're going to go back to an environment where everybody's going to be in the office and our data is never going to leave our four walls. So this is going to be critical for companies to figure out how to enable their employees to work remote, but also work secure. And again, so, remote work should be secure work. It can be, right? There are very practical solutions, practical technologies that people can use to enable this. This isn't rocket science. This isn't putting a man on the moon. This is just some very practical things that organizations were never forced to consider in a pre-COVID world because most companies still went to work. So, how do you give safe and secure access to your critical on-premise apps? I'll talk about this when we get a little bit later about disaster recovery and disaster solutions. But how do you give them access? Is it through a web client? Is it through HTTPS? Do you need a VPN? Do you need any of these other things that can help reduce, your exposure while employees are working remote? So, and again, home PCs, some people were using, which are probably not the best idea. Personal mobile devices, the whole bring your own device pieces to work. Do you want them to do that, A? And B, if you do want them to bring their own device, how can you protect your information on their device? And then a huge one is phishing attempts and ransomware. And so we'll talk about that in a little bit when it comes to some stats. But the very real truth is the biggest risk from a cybersecurity and an attack perspective isn't some malicious hacker sitting there keying away trying to break into your network. It's a simple human error, right? It's somebody clicking on the wrong email or sending the wrong file to somebody, right? Like a very simple example of a data breach that I've used in the past is, one of my best friends' name is Dave and my boss's name is Dave. So imagine, I'm emailing back and forth with my friend about our fantasy football league. And all of a sudden I meant to send my boss Dave a sales forecast and it's sent to my friend Dave by accident because he was the last Dave I was emailing with. And so there's a very, completely non-malicious human error that, not paying attention to the details in the email where now we've got a data breach because our sales forecast has left the organization by simple human error. Not saying that happened, I use it as an example, but you can see how easy it does. So some of the major pain points that we've seen for mid-sized businesses in COVID and on this secure remote work track. So email, as I mentioned, is the single largest threat to your organization from people just not paying attention. They think it's a good email to open and all of a sudden you've got a breach. The way that ransomware works as well is, somebody double clicks the wrong email and the ransomware needs your network to propagate itself. So as we talk about cloud and cloud-based systems, because we're decoupling those systems from your networks, the ability of ransomware to go get all those different pieces of information to hold hostage is drastically reduced. Antivirus, we all know that having a reliable antivirus system needs to be there. And I don't know if anybody's seen some of the features now, specifically in the Office 365 product stack, but you can make it so that, certain documents can't be read outside of the organization. So there's certain features there that you can do that, if you're sending a proposal outbound, you give it a different classification of document. If you're sending something internally, you can give it a different classification of document. And so you can kind of control who accesses what parts of your data to prevent the scenario that I just mentioned about our sales forecast, right? Going on to mobile devices, this is another huge one. People downloading unverified apps, I think it is. So you're not downloading apps from Google Play or the iTunes. They're installing apps that may not have that same level of verification. And so if they're also accessing, corporate email or, collaboration suites on their phones, and they're using these apps and you can't control who installs what where, it's a huge risk when it comes to mobility. So you have kind of two choices, right? You can either not let people do that, or you have to get them to install some protection and some monitoring tools onto their phone, which are pretty quick and painless. So identity and security management, again, is another big one. People using, password for password. I hope nobody does that anymore, but, enforcing password policies, enforcing password renewals, using some sort of password vault to store all your passwords on your computer. Those sorts of things are huge. And again, not huge. That's huge from a technology perspective, not huge from an implementation perspective, but huge to understand how that impacts your users and your ability to do business. From a compliance perspective, you're forced to do a certain standard regardless of how large you are. So a lot of the times, understanding what those compliance requirements are, and then how picking the right technology provider to close those gaps for you. Okay, so again, some stats that I was pulling up in preparing this, and I'm not trying to scare anybody on the phone, but these are just very real COVID-19 realities that have come up in the last little bit. So people were saying that COVID has been classified as the largest cybersecurity threat ever. You've seen it with banks, you've seen it with governments, you've seen it with all over the place where it's just running rampant, and the cyber criminals are trying to take advantage of the fact now that people are working from home. I found it interesting that cyber attacks were the most prevalent in healthcare and financial industries, which I thought would be applicable for this chat here. I already introduced this topic as well. Email attacks were the most common source of data breaches while working from home. And yet somehow cybersecurity budgets have decreased, even though the need to be ever more vigilant is today. Organizations are cutting back on spend due to COVID. So you can kind of see how this is a bit of a double-edged sword that may not end well. And again, I'm not going to read all of these stats. You guys can read them on your own, but half of employees cited distraction for opening a bad email. Web breaches for 43%. Again, reinforcing the need from a stats perspective that it is critically imperative that you figure out how to address this gap for your end users. And so COVID-19 in the cloud and how the cloud can help, or technology in general. Me being a cloud-based or cloud organization, this is kind of the perspective that we're coming at it with, but how technology can help with COVID-19, specifically with a cloud spin, I guess, for this presentation. So in doing this at WatServ for the last 6.5 years, I think every conversation I had with a company regarding a disaster or disaster recovery or business continuity all revolved around natural disasters, right? People wanted to know, is your data center in a hurricane zone, or is your data center prone to earthquakes, or are they in Tornado Alley, or, what are the odds of a flood, or, forest fires, some of the key themes that we're seeing in the last little bit and what's going on in Alabama, I think it is, and on the West Coast, right? So everybody was focused on how to prevent or how to recover from the disaster when it was a natural disaster. In COVID world, your offices were still there, your data was still there. The disaster now was your people. And so, I used that example of the police department earlier, right? But, you remove the people from the organization and it's just as impactful on organizations trying to get rolling again. So again, this whole presentation around secure remote work and some of the things that you need to consider, excuse me, how can you now plan for the disaster being human and not a natural one. So some very local or some very practical things you can understand and start thinking about is using technology to impact the disruption of a disaster while improving security, improving performance, and reducing costs. So, local hardware, right? I don't think anybody anymore is, going down the road of buying servers and putting them in racks and trying to maintain those systems. So how can you provide your users with that same experience, yet using either cloud-based or outsourced services to replace that local hardware need? Adding pandemic planning now to the definition of a natural disaster, right? We're also seeing a disaster coming from the cyber side of things, right? With ransomware and malware and phishing attempts. So those can be just as impactful, if not more so, if you're hit with a ransomware attack than dealing with a tornado or a hurricane. Those are extremely expensive to recover from and not easy to do. And you have a reputation, reputational issue if you're hit with ransomware. It's perceived that you didn't know how to keep your business system safe. And again, human error is the largest threat to your business. Opening the wrong email, sending the wrong file. The one thing I would think is a very natural, very easy thing for almost any organization out there to do now is stop using local file shares, right? Everybody old school, you had some sort of a shared drive, everybody had network access to it, and you were storing all of your mortgage contracts, you're storing all your legal documents, all in this one massive shared folder. One person gets hit with a ransomware attack, all that information is gone, right? It is all corrupted because it's all on your network and your users are on your network. And so use something like, and I don't care whether it's OneDrive, Box, SharePoint Online, Google Drive, decouple your critical information from your network, right? And again, being a Microsoft partner, I'll speak about Microsoft, right? Like I've sat in presentations where people are like, well, is the cloud secure? And, is, Exchange Online and email secure? Is SharePoint Online secure or Teams secure? And I think it was one Microsoft executive I heard say, who do you think spends more on security, you or Microsoft? And so with that, I think kind of resonates, right? Like trust the people who do this for a living to keep your stuff safe. And again, I hope everybody is trying to act or trying to get to that spot with no more large file shares where everything is on your network and everybody has that access to it on your network. So some practical steps. We already talked about the file shares and getting some of the stuff off-prem, separating business systems off of your network. But a huge thing is look in the mirror. I've said this in my talks for the last couple of years now. It's no longer enough to try to prevent a disaster from happening, right? And by disaster in this case, I'm going to refer to, cybersecurity, malware attacks, remote working now is a very real one that's come up, obviously. You need to have a plan in place for when it does happen. And I'll reinforce this again. It's not enough to just try to stop an attack from happening. You need a very real practical plan in place on how are you going to get back to work when it does happen. The stats on the other slides that you can go back and read reinforce that, tenfold, that it's going to happen to everybody. And I saw in a different presentation that I give, there's a slide from James Comey, the former FBI director, who says there are two types of businesses, those who have been hacked and those who don't know they've been hacked. And so you need to have these plans in place. So conduct a readiness assessment, right? What's my strategy? How am I going to do, what are my practical steps for prevention? What are my practical steps for remediation when it does happen? You need engagement from your people, right? Everybody in the organization needs to know the new digital world that we're living in and how that can affect your ability to do business. This needs to be a very top-down conversation from, you know, CEO, president, CFO, on down to the organization that, you know, being digital, we are a digital company. I think Satya from Microsoft always says that, you know, every organization is a digital organization now. So you need to drive those policies, those procedures, you know, understand what that looks like from the, you know, shop floor end user, not shop floor in this case, the front user, all the way up to the top, that, you know, the risk is the same from a CEO to an intern from double clicking on the wrong email, right? It really doesn't matter anymore. The risk is the same. So there are very practical solutions you can put in place that are fairly cost effective on training and evaluating your people. Something that we do internally at WatServ here is we actually send out phishing emails to our own people from our own people, right? So we get reports that say, hey, you know, we sent this out to everybody at WatServ. This many people read the email. This many people deleted the email without reading the email. This many people opened the email, which is the worst case. And then you can kind of go back and train your people on, hey, you can't look at these. You can't do this. You can't do that. You know, you need to do this better. You can even do some certain courses, right? There are, you know, we have to do cybersecurity training every year. And it's simple on, you know, the emails will come from, you know, it'll look like somebody who works at your organization, but do they, you know, would this person ever ask you for banking information, or would this person ever ask you for this? And how your employees should be reacting if they get an email like that, right? So, you know, think about somebody in accounts payable gets an email from the CEO saying, hey, here's an urgent invoice I need you to pay with Bitcoin, and can you please pay this right away? You don't reply to the email because now you've been exposed, but then use a different method to reach out to the CEO, send him a text, walk down the hall, send him an IM, whatever it is, and hey, you sent me this email, you know, do you really want me to send this money? If it comes back legit from a communication method, you know, you're probably okay. But 9 times out of 10, they go, I didn't send anything over to you asking you to pay a bill. So conducting that training, conducting that baseline is a huge thing to stop the attacks from happening in the first place. The other thing is cyber insurance. You can actually take out insurance policies in the event of a cyber attack or the event of a malware attack. And so have that in place. It's a practical thing you can do to minimize risk in the event of an attack. And you have to be willing to adapt, right? So, you know, understand that, hey, what worked today may not work tomorrow. You know, you may put a training program in place today. You may need a different kind of training program in place in the future. So you have to be willing to adapt. These are very fluid and dynamic times. And I would also say that, you know, be 100% transparent with your customers and your employees, right? Make sure your employees understand the plan, understand the prevention, understand what their role is and how critical it is that they are diligent, you know, diligent digital citizens. Sorry, I didn't mean to stumble there. You know, and you can also have, sorry, that's for the employees, be transparent with your customers, right? You will earn way more credibility if you go to your customers and say, hey, we've been hacked or we've had an attack. This is what happened. This is the risk and the exposure to you, versus trying to cover it up. You will gain way more credibility and way more trust with your customer base by being transparent than trying to sweep it under the rug. There are cybersecurity firms out there that are ready and willing to help in the event of a disaster or in the event of an attack. Have one in place. You can even put them on retainers. You can put them on, you know, very small stipends where, you know, you kind of go to the front of the line in the event that you have suffered an attack versus you suffer an attack and you go, now I got to find a cybersecurity firm. Identify one in place, have a plan in place on how you're going to engage with them, what's the fee structure going to be, and kind of have that plan ready in the event that something does happen. And a huge part of this is understand this isn't a one-time exercise. So understand that you need, you know, to be revisiting these things, revisit these plans, and understand how you can do this going forward, because it's not enough to put it in place one time and never come back to it again.
Tyler, I have a quick question for you.
Yeah.
How often do you think, or do you know, companies that go through an attack, they go through this cybersecurity firm, they do everything they're supposed to do, and they put a plan in place, and then they never revisit it? Why is it so important to continuously revisit this plan and test it out?
Because the threats are always changing, right? Like, the number of types of threats where they originate from, different pieces, like as certain software becomes end of life and companies stop supporting it. I think there was one attack, I can't remember which virus it was, but I want to say maybe the WannaCry one from a few years ago, where it attacked the old Windows 7 operating system. And there was a whole hospital network in the UK, I think it was, that hadn't upgraded their PCs. And so Microsoft end-of-lifed the operating system. And now all of a sudden, because they did that, there were all sorts of security holes that were exposed. And now that became a new threat that wasn't there when it was a supported platform. So it's a constant revaluation of what your technology footprint is, what solutions are available, and kind of keep that rolling. Does that answer your question, Jordan?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
No problem. And yeah, so it's not a set it and forget it, right? And that's a huge thing. It could be, you're buying new laptops. You could be, are you going from Windows-based PCs to Chromebooks? What does that look like from a security perspective? It's not enough to change out the hardware. You need to understand the impact that hardware has from a malware perspective, from a ransomware perspective. Does Google do the same thing? Does Microsoft, or vice versa? So as you're making what you think are very, very minor decisions on what type of laptop to buy, it could have a much broader impact on your technology platform and exposure. Okay. So from a technology perspective, I try to spend at least the first half hour talking more industry trends, more things you need to think about as an organization. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the solutions that we've built and that we have kind of to close some of these gaps, to help organizations in this fashion. There are a lot of other, I'm not trying to make this a WatServ sales pitch. These are the types of services that you as an end customer should be looking for from a vendor, whether it's Bestborn and Lone Vision and us, or somebody else. It completely doesn't matter to me. So some of the services that we do is a cloud impact workshop. So, what would be the impact to the business? What are the ROI? What are the technologies available from the cloud to help your business? We still, at the bottom here, we do Microsoft Azure, Microsoft Dynamics, Office 365. We do the Google platform as well. We also have a private cloud. A very viable cloud option is still deploying on-prem, but understanding which one makes the most sense for which technology you're looking to deploy. A roadmap. So we can do these 3 buckets, or frankly, any of the 9 boxes in the 3 buckets in either ad hoc or as from an end-to-end. So do the plan and do the management and optimizing, or we can do them in piecemeal, right? So we can help do the impact. Hey, here's what we would recommend, and then you can go off and do it yourself. You can do the plan, come to us to have us do the build, and then we'll turn it over to you to run. But, kind of that, and this is kind of, like I said, that constant 360 degree, right? You do the build, you do the construction, you get it to the run state, and then you're coming back to the plan again. Did it work? What else is there? What else do we need to look at? So this is kind of the bucket of services that we have. Again, everything from the plan, doing the transformation from on-prem to the cloud. And again, this can be across productivity suite, across infrastructure, secure remote work, any of these different pieces. But a huge part, again, is we haven't really talked about, we've talked about the risk and the threats and some of the practical steps, but then it's the ongoing management and optimization and coming back to this over and over and over again. Is it working? Is it effective? Have we hired a bunch of new employees, and do we need to now do training because we've had staff turnover, and the new staff may not have taken the same email training that the old staff did. So doing that management and optimization inside your organization is huge. From a loan vision perspective, we've been lucky enough to work with the Best Born team for the last 4 years, sort of thing, where certain subsets of their customers don't want to buy infrastructure, they don't want to deploy on premise, and so Carl will come to me and say, "Hey, I've got a customer, they want to deploy in the cloud. Can you help them out?" And this is kind of the simplest slide I can show as to kind of the service we provide for Loan Vision itself. So we can basically take it from on-prem, put it in the cloud, layer on all of our managed services, all of our security, all of our monitoring, all those sorts of things, and you basically just use it the way that you do today. So you being the end customer with Best Born and Loan Vision in the background, Best Born and Loan Vision will still monitor or still perform all your application support. They will still provide your training. We just take off that whole back-end administration of your infrastructure in a way that, frankly, most customers can't justify the cost for the service that we provide to make sure that your business systems are safe and secure and monitored and patched and backed up and all that sort of thing. I'm not sure the percentage of people on this call, Jordan, that would be using Microsoft 365 or Office 365, but there is a massive suite of products out there from Microsoft that, almost, and it doesn't have to be Microsoft. Again, this is our spin. Google has their collaboration suite, and there's Zoom, and there's GoToMeeting, and all those sorts of things. But, if you look at what Microsoft has lumped into their business premium subscription for like $15 or $18 per user per month, if I'm not mistaken, and it includes all your email, all your collaboration suite, SharePoint for your documents, as we talked about before, OneDrive for other pieces, Windows Virtual Desktop from and accessing things securely and remotely, to your traditional Office suite of products, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, all those different pieces. This is by far, I think, the biggest bang for the buck that almost any organization could make, is investing and understanding all the different tool sets that you get inside this Microsoft 365 Business Premium solution for, like I said, for the $15 or $18 per user per month, to have this level of productivity, and security and risk management at your fingertips is huge. And I would encourage, if anybody on this call is still buying Office and installing it locally, or using a hodgepodge of different tools, maybe you're using Exchange for email, but then you're using Sheets for your spreadsheets, then take a look at it. Does it really make sense to keep doing it that way? Again, the Microsoft 365 Business Premium stack is very, very good from end to end at a price point that I think is very, very hard to not accept. The other thing that we've launched as well here is a 5-day assessment for secure remote work. So we introduced those topics at the beginning of, endpoints of your users are the biggest threat to people being able to get into your business system. So we can actually go across all of your users, excuse me. So we can actually go across everybody who's accessing your data, accessing, or using, or that you're employed to do the job, and take a look at where those vulnerabilities are, right? Is it at the end user level? Is it at a network level? Is it at a hardware level? Is it at, people are using, your work computers or your company-owned computers for their kids' online school in the evenings, right? Understanding your exposure here is huge. And we can kind of go across the entire organization, help point those things out. And we'll even get into, addressing security holes that come out of that assessment, collaboration tools that are available, again, Teams, again, Zoom, that you may not even know are available to you yet. going back to Lone Vision itself, does it make sense to have Lone Vision running on 5-year-old infrastructure when they're 5-year-old Microsoft-based infrastructure that's end of life and needs to be updated? So taking a look at those sorts of things. And then improving, we call it the client experience, but for you, it's your user's experience, right? So driving that standardization, making sure that everybody is using OneDrive or SharePoint, and not, some people are using Box, some people are using Google, some people are using whatever other file storage places that there are, and making sure that you truly know where all of your digital assets are being stored. So, and again, improving that client experience so that you're not having to do what I did leading up to this webinar, which was, oh, I have to do a Zoom call, which I don't normally do because we've standardized on Teams, and so having to kind of figure all that different stuff out. So again, it kind of gives you, that 5-day assessment gives you a very real, very practical overview of what your technology footprint, your technology risk assessment looks like. And then you can kind of make some decisions, right? Not everybody's going to be able to go out and afford some of the solutions. So understanding that you can't afford to buy everything because it's just not practical, understanding what those risks are, what's the cost to mitigate them, and nobody can make that decision but you, right? Like, how much are you willing to spend to prevent a certain problem, and what is the likelihood of that problem happening? We can't answer that for you. We can kind of point out the risks, but you kind of have to make that determination on your own. So with that, that's kind of the end of what I had prepared from here. So a little bit of who we are. We are a cloud-based managed services provider. I'm coming to you live from my basement just outside of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Our heritage and our legacy has been built on the Microsoft Dynamics ERP stack, which Lone Vision is built on top of in the NAV product suite. So again, we've been working with the Lone Vision group for quite a few years now. Happy to continue that relationship and grow that relationship. Sorry, I just got a call coming in. We have currently today about 10,000 users coming in from 50 countries around the world into our either Azure-based data centers or our public cloud or private cloud data centers. And from a security of vendor perspective, we're owned by Brookfield Asset Management, one of the largest private equity firms on the planet. So from a vendor perspective, we're not going anywhere. So with that, if there's any other questions, otherwise I will say thank you. Jordan, Carl, Martin, thank you very much for the opportunity. I would have much rather have been in Denver with everybody this week, but I don't know that I could cross the border even if I wanted to. So thank you again, everybody on the call. Thank you for attending. Jordan, I will share this deck with you and you can send it out to everybody that need be, but please feel free to reach out through email, office line, or your best bet is to get me on my cell phone. So if there's any other questions, I'm happy to, is there a way that I can open this, Jordan?
So everyone can, if you have any questions, you can submit them via the Q&A or the chat. You can also raise your hand. If anybody raises their hand, Tyler, you'll get a little notification. They'll have a little hand next to their name. But while we wait for those to come in, I do have a quick question for you. You mentioned earlier in the presentation about cybersecurity trainings. Do you have a recommendation on where they can find those types of trainings, for themselves and for their employees?
So we've partnered with a company, I believe it's called Wombat, who does that sort of cybersecurity training. And it does do the simulations. It will, you can kind of license with them, run your own simulations, and it'll give you those reports on who did what where and who opened the email and what are some of those stats are. That's the one that we've used in the past. I'm sure there are a bunch of others, and I'm happy to put some recommendations in an email for whoever's asking, unless that's yourself, Jordan, in which case I can do that with you as well.
That was my question. And Wombat, it's Wombat, like the animal, correct? Yeah. Okay. Correct. I'm just Googling them real quick so I can share that as well. Are they through a company called Proofpoint?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. So I can share that with everyone as well if you're interested. But it doesn't look like anybody has any questions for us, Tyler. You did such a great job of covering your topic. So I want to thank you. Thank you for...
Either that or everybody's multitasking, which is what I tend to do.
I want to thank you, you and everyone on the call today for joining us, for you taking this presentation virtual. It's definitely been hard, and this week we've been a little sad in the office because we've been starting to realize that we were supposed to leave on Friday, so we're a little, it's getting to us. It's getting to us. But like I said, I want to thank everyone for tuning in today. Tyler, thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. Shout out to the great sponsors of our Industry Insight series. Without them, we wouldn't be here. We are going to continue the series next week on Wednesday at 3 p.m. where Mark Wilson of CWDL is going to lead the discussion on appropriately evaluating the needs of your department and ensuring you are maximizing the efficiency of each position, which I think is a great segue from this. We got a little technology. We're going to get a little on how, like I said, you can, maximize that efficiency in your department. We hope to see you guys there. Thank you all and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, guys.